The beginning of media days provides a lesson for college head coaches. Don't be like Mike Gundy.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and we're on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind to a close and baseball season takes over. The sports kind of stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a bonus or a boost daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Head to FanDuel.com to get started.
All right, welcome in. Mitch Sherman here. Connor Happer is with me as always. It is a special time in the college football calendar, and Tuesday was a special day, Connor, the opening of media days around the country. Nebraska is up to bat in 2 weeks exactly in Indianapolis. Will be a fun Wednesday there in Indiana, and we're going to talk about that during the show. But the Big 12, it seeks an open window before the SEC and the others steal the headlines. So the Big 12 is leading off this year from Las Vegas, and usually media days are full of boring interviews, sound bites that don't have much staying power. But 56-year-old Mike Gundy, he stole the show on Tuesday. Let's just play the clip to listen to what the Oklahoma coach had to say.
I looked it up on my phone. What would be the legal limit? Like in Oklahoma is 0.08, and Ollie was 0.1. So I looked it up, and it was based on body weight. Not to get into the legal side of it, but I thought really 2 or 3 beers or 4. I'm not justifying what Ollie did. I'm telling you what decision I made. Well, I thought I've probably done that 1,000 times in my life. And I, it's just fine. So I got lucky. People get lucky. Ollie made a decision that he wished he could have done better. But when I talked to Ollie, I told him, I said, you're lucky you got out light because you make a lot of money to play football.
All right. What'd you think about that?
Man.
Here.
A lot of different ways to handle player getting. It's a player of Ollie Gordon's, notoriety around the country. Like, he's one of the best players in the country. Gets a DUI in the offseason, and he shows up at media days. And
he was there. That was another interesting element of this.
The other thing that Gundy said was like, the punishment is internal, and part of the punishment is we're going to give him 50 carries the first game or something.
Yeah.
So
that's his punishment. He's got to carry it 50 times.
We talked about Rule in Nebraska handling sticky situations and being very, very good at that. Gundy's been there a long time. He's got his own way of doing things, and I don't know that this is a masterclass by him. It certainly made the waves around college football.
You know what? This is a coach he's right. He's been there forever at Oklahoma State. He doesn't care. He doesn't care if this is a master class in how to handle PR. It's the opposite of what you saw at Nebraska on Friday and Saturday with dealing, finding your way through a difficult news cycle. And Oklahoma State was also in a difficult situation when its star running back received a DUI on June 30th. And he's 20 years old, by the way. 2 or 3 or 4 beers, that's just what it would take to to get to that 0.08, which is the legal limit.
Maybe you're just better off saying probably just, he made a bad decision. Let's not start counting beers and then see how many it takes before we don't get a DUI when we're in the car. Not the best thing for a college football coach to kind of dive into, especially when his player is, at the forefront of this discussion. So weird.
Memorable quote from Gundy during this segment or during this clip. I thought I've probably done that 1,000 times in my life, which is fine. That he said that. He said that. So you have driven drunk 1,000 times, and you coach a college football team, and here you are at the conference media days, and you're going to highlight that fact for all of these microphones and media who are starved to get a soundbite as the media days season begins. I don't know. Maybe this is me, and maybe I'm making more of this than should be made, because it just seems so bizarre for someone to go and say that. But I can promise there will not be another coach as we go through these next couple of weeks at all the media days around the country who say anything even remotely like what Mike Gundy said on Tuesday. And I guess that's great, because that's what makes Mike Gundy Mike Gundy. I mean, it's been 16 years since he stood up at the podium and flipped out about being 40.
Proclaimed that he was a man. Yes.
Yes.
He was 40.
But
he's
here we are.
Like, so I went, or your colleague actually, Stuart Mandel, he had a tweet yesterday afternoon, and he was at the event, and he said he got a chance to follow up with Gundy about this for a few seconds. Gundy said he was referring to all the times people make bad decisions, not specifically drunk driving. And I got to say, that's not the way it came off in the video. So I think you're right. Gundy, he talks, and he, like, a lot of it is stream of consciousness. He just like says stuff, and like they've won. Here's the weird part about college football. Like, that guy is in a place that it's not super duper high profile. Like, it's not a blue blood of the sport. There's obviously a lot of money, and it's a big business and all that stuff. But this is not the first time, far from it, that he's put his foot in his mouth. And what you said at the beginning is absolutely true. Like, it doesn't seem to matter for him. He's in such an interesting place. He's won so many games, and he's put that program in such a different place over the last 20 plus years, where he's been the coach. He's one of the longest tenured coaches in college football. It feels like he could be a candidate for another job 500 times over if he wanted to be, but yet he stays there. And and stuff like this happens like once or twice a year to Gundy, and it doesn't like, and the wheel just keeps on turning for him. Nothing changes ever. It's crazy.
He could be a candidate for another job, except for moments like this that prevent him from being taken seriously.
Yeah.
So normally things that happen at media days stay in media days, and that should be the mantra as the Big 12 goes to Las Vegas.
Nice.
But I tend to think that if this one, if Oklahoma State makes a run this year, and it's very much a possibility. The Cowboys have 20 starters back, including Ollie Gordon, the most notable of those 20 starters, perhaps the top running back in the country. He was last year. They are a real possibility to make a run at the college football playoff in a Big 12 that does not include Oklahoma or Texas.
Yeah.
And if Oklahoma State is out there in November in the college football playoff rankings, atop the Big 12 standings, which delivers an automatic berth into the 12-team college football playoff, this kind of stuff is going to be front and center because Oklahoma State has not played in the college football playoff. I read a stat on Tuesday night that Oklahoma State has the second most appearances in the college football playoff rankings without actually getting into the 4-team playoff. One week behind Utah, which is the all-time leader among teams that have not made the playoffs. So those things are going to go by the wayside in a 12-team playoff. If you're in the picture every year, you're going to get in at some point. And Mike Gundy is going to be out there on the big stage, and it will be interesting to see because it's not really a big stage. As much as we talk about this stuff a lot in July because there's nothing else to talk about, it's not really a big stage in college football until you get to the college football playoff. And I can't wait to see Mike Gundy in that space.
Oh, me too. Well, and as far as Oklahoma State in the playoff, like they are one of the schools you think of them because they finished just about in the top 15, pretty much every year. And Penn State, they're one of those schools. Utah's probably one of those schools that are always kind of in that realm, but are on the outside looking into the 14 playoff. Those are the teams that are going to be fighting for spots. So I'm super interested I like the idea of him getting a bigger platform and just let's roll the ball out there and see what happens for Mike Gundy, because he's a wild card. You never know. All right, so let's take a break here. When we come back on the other side, we'll sort of transition this topic to Nebraska. What might Nebraska's media day look like in a couple weeks? Probably no conversation about what Mike Gundy's talking about, but we'll preview that a little bit when we return. But a reminder quickly to please subscribe and follow us on Twitter at LockedOnNEB. Email us lockedonneb@gmail.com. We'll take your questions, thoughts, comment on our YouTube videos, wherever you watch us. We really appreciate it. We'll be back. We'll talk about Nebraska at Media Days next. All right. I love sports. This is a well-documented fact, Mitch. I love them so much that I really never want them to stop. But unfortunately, the playoffs are over, unfortunately for me. And so there's pretty much just baseball. And next week, when we head into All-Star Week, there'll just be like one baseball game. It'll be the slowest sports days of the year as we head into next week. But fortunately for me, FanDuel's got my back, and they let me keep the sports going whenever I want to. So all I have to do is open up the FanDuel Sportsbook app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. So if I'm thinking about college football win totals, if I'm thinking about Major League Baseball futures, it's all there for me. And FanDuel is
Home Run Derby.
Home Run Derby, where Bobby Witt Jr. is participating. Might be interested in a little bit of that. So here's the deal. You could be like me. All customers on the FanDuel Sportsbook are getting a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone. Every day, all summer long, head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. I remember Mitch last year. Welcome back, by the way, to the Locked On Nebraska podcast. Connor Happer and Mitch Sherman with you. Remember Matt Rule's big thing at Big Ten Media Days last year was we're gonna fight to get the respect back.
Oh yes, the respect.
The respect. He did an interview with 700 local radio stations and then set it up top at the podium as well. Curious where your mind goes on this. When Matt Rule gets up there and he does the other 700 interviews with the local radio stations again in 2 weeks, what's the message? What's the overarching thought from Matt Rule?
I think it's going to be something similar. Maybe Nebraska's place in the Big Ten hasn't changed all that much in 1 year with Matt Rule in command. This is another losing season for Nebraska. Yeah. Locally, things have changed. There's a lot of excitement about this team. Everyone's going to want to talk about Dylan Raiola, except for Matt Rule, who's going to want to downplay that and talk about all of his quarterbacks. I don't think that will be the primary talking point that Matt Rule walks into Indianapolis with. It's not going to be about the quarterbacks. It's not going to be about a better offense. It's not going to be about playing defense like Nebraska played last year. I think it's going to be something similar, some kind of a platitude along the lines of what he said last year about how they have to go out and earn the respect of people before they can then think about winning and then ultimately winning championships or competing for championships. So it's a bigger landscape. We've got 4 new teams in the Big Ten this year that will be introduced in 2 weeks in Indianapolis before they actually join the league officially, which comes on August 2nd. But they'll be there representing in front of everybody at the Dome. I don't know. It's a good question. I think Matt Rule's probably sitting on the Jersey Shore this month and got his notebook out and trying to come up with something that he can say that's going to make the Huskers stand out a little bit. That's a hard thing to do in an 18-team league.
He's cooking, man. I bet he is. I bet he's on the Jersey Shore right now. He's like reading a book, but then he's also thinking about what he could potentially. What's the main point that he's gonna bring home? I remember thinking, sort of translating that idea last year of like the get the respect back thing. I think mostly he was talking about Nebraska's propensity to self-destruct, and obviously the turnovers I think are a big part of that. And so I think you make a really good point when we talk about, Nebraska's minus 17 in the turnover margin last year. They self-destructed like 5 times in games last year. They could have won a few more games. And so I don't know.
That is correct.
that idea advanced so much to where they're past that point. It's one thing that we have not talked about that much. And, I think obviously the quarterback, gets better and Nebraska gets better, and we'll see how much that improves or how much it's able to mask and all that stuff. And the defense is still going to be really good. But I'm still curious about the idea, because I think Matt Rule was really, taken aback by Nebraska's, like I said, propensity to kind of just, self-destruct in games. The mental part we talked about a lot last year. I don't think that it got like completely fixed to the point where I don't have to worry about it anymore if I'm a Nebraska fan.
Yeah, he was stunned by that, I would say, at the outset of the season. I think he thought that doing his normal coaching thing, following the formula that had taken him to good places in Philly and in Waco, that he could install that at Nebraska, and whatever problems existed in the past on the field, they would take care of themselves, because he was doing this the right way, the Matt Rule way. And then they went to Minnesota, and it was nope. It was no. This is just, you're going to have to address this in a different way and attack this problem, head on, or it's just not going to change. And it really didn't change. That's a scary thought for Nebraska as it goes into 2024, because how did the season end? It ended just like it started, with a turnover late in the game that led to a winning score by a Big Ten opponent in a game that Nebraska had at one point and gave away. So that's the last memory we have of Nebraska football on the field, out there against Iowa, just wondering what happened in the last couple minutes of that game. And it's the same way the season started at Minnesota. So I think it's been glossed over a little bit as we've gone through this offseason, because Dylan Raiola committed 3 weeks later after that game. And then it was off to the races with the spring and summer hype. So July is probably on the internal side, an opportunity and a moment to remember that, and remember the struggles that Nebraska had last year in being able to put away opponents. And that's something that should come up in Matt Rule's remarks in Indianapolis. How are they going to do that?
Right. And there's only one way to fix it, right? You just have to do it. You just have to, they just have to get over it. They kind of just have to figure it out. So it'll be something that we won't know the answer to until, you probably get through the month of September or something like that. Quick one on media days before we move on and talk about the actual topical stuff of Nebraska football right now. Any guesses on who might represent Nebraska in 2 weeks? I'm sure we'll do this episode or this segment again at some point when
we find out the player.
Announced. But who do you think shows up?
Yeah, it's strange the Big Ten hasn't announced that. For all of us who are out there and trying to plan around this event and figure out what to talk about when we get to Indy and what questions to ask. I guess it shows that the coaches are the stars of this thing, because the players are such an afterthought that we're less than 2 weeks from the event, and there's been no announcement made about who's actually going to be there on the player side of thing. For Nebraska, that's a great question. I could see Nebraska taking a tight end. And I could see them taking Thomas Fidone. Thomas has a tendency to really speak what he's thinking, and they might need somebody to walk around with him and make sure he stays on topic. Otherwise, we could have a Mike Gundy moment. Probably not of that nature, but you never know where it could go. More likely, I'd say an offensive lineman. Bryce Benhart, he doesn't like to do this stuff. And you could see it in the spring when he talked. He's a get me down to business kind of guy, and he would just rather play ball. So I would think he might try to ask his way out of it. So maybe Ben Scott on the offensive side, and then probably a couple defensive guys. Isaac Gifford seems like a no brainer, like a
lock.
Can't miss. Yeah, and I think they'll probably take one of those D linemen. Nash or Ty Robinson, maybe Jamari Butler gets an opportunity to go to this, and those would, to me, would be the top candidates.
Yeah, I mean, people in the conference are going to. I totally agree. By the way, I think Gifford's probably a lock, and Nash is, Nash or Ty. Maybe you just do both and then call it good.
You could do that, and that would help create some storylines. If you want people talking about your defensive line, bring both of those guys.
Illinois, I think, did the same thing last year with their big 2 defensive linemen up front. I remember talking to those guys. So it's been done before, and there's always like a theme that I think coaches want to follow, or things that they want to reward and stuff like that. But the conference is going to want to talk to the quarterback, and I don't think the quarterback's going to be there.
No, he's not. I mean, Heinrich might go. They could send him. I mean, hey, he started 8 games last year, so if a quarterback goes, I think it would be Heinrich Harburg, because Dylan Royale is not going to Indianapolis. Nebraska will be up, by the way, on day 2 of media days. It is with Iowa, Michigan State, Penn State, UCLA, and USC. So the LA flavor on day 2 of media days. Maybe a little bit more media because of that at the event on that day. I don't know. Do they care? Will media from LA go to this thing? Maybe not. Day 1 brings us Ohio State, Northwestern, Illinois, Purdue, Rutgers, Wisconsin. That's kind of blah, except for the Buckeyes, of course. And then that's day 3 is Indiana, Minnesota, Michigan, Maryland, Oregon, and Washington. So
they always do that. They always do a, when this event used to be 2 days, which it's not anymore. It's now 3. There was always a Michigan day and an Ohio State day.
Yeah.
There was the Ohio State day was like, you kind of just threw a bunch of everybody else in there, and that was kind of it. The conference definitely knows who its favorites are and stuff like that. But as far as like the media contingencies that are there, and I mean, Nebraska and Ohio State are right at the top. I don't imagine any of the West Coast schools will bring anywhere close to what Nebraska and Ohio State do. So that's always a factor.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk more about that as conference media days gets closer. Still a ways off. Still some vacation time for people who are looking for that, including me. Connor, so a programming note: we'll have one more show this week, and then maybe some shows from I don't know. We'll see whatever destination I show up in at some point next week could be interesting. I might be sitting in a pool as I do the pod, and I know the viewers especially would perhaps not appreciate that. So if
disagree, I think they'll be fired up about that.
All right. Into this segment next, we're going to talk about some of the comings and goings over the summer at Nebraska, putting all of that in perspective in the wake of Evan Cooper's departure that we talked about so much Tuesday on the show. Reminder, if you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV and you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting all day, make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today delivers can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news. It's streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Okay, back for the final segment of this Wednesday episode of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. I'm Mitch Sherman. Connor Happer is with me. Tuesday, as I mentioned a minute ago, we talked about Evan Cooper and his untimely exit from Nebraska as the secondary coach. If you've not heard that analysis, go back and listen to that. Watch that Tuesday episode. We get into all of the importance that Evan Cooper carried as a talent evaluator and, of course, as a position coach on the field. We discussed John Butler, the expected choice to replace Evan Cooper. He's yet to be announced at Nebraska as the secondary coach. But, it's July. Some of the contract and legal people are maybe on vacation. There's not any urgency to announce this hire right now when Butler, if he is the new coach, can't do a whole lot of anything except maybe set up his office and tour the campus until we get to just a few days before training camp opens at the very end of this month. So also on Tuesday on The Athletic, I published a list of all of the comings and goings of significance during this spring and summer transaction period. Since the spring game ended, or since the spring football practice season ended with the spring game on April 27th, there's been quite a bit that's happened that we've covered on the show, but it's been kind of broken up. So I wanted to put that all into one place and kind of rank those things in order of importance. And, my assessment pretty easily was that Cooper's departure was the most significant development in that area of this offseason. Connor, do you, first of all, agree with that analysis?
Definitely. I think my main takeaway is that, you go through the list and we're talking about additions of depth pieces and, projects basically along the various positions from young guys, late ads and stuff like that who are freshmen, and not too many losses. So once you remove yourself from like the actual recruiting period, which Nebraska obviously got a huge coup in getting Dylan Raiola, but like once you go after that up until right now, I think the main takeaway is that it's been a very uneventful offseason for Nebraska, with the exception of what happened on Friday, and then into the weekend, and we'll see how that one develops, obviously. But Nebraska didn't add. We'll see with Sire, right? It's probably the biggest one, and I agree with you. It's the biggest one outside of what happened on Friday with the various moves with the defensive backs coaches. But like, that's the only place where you probably got or lost a person that will like really give you significant minutes this year or a potential starter. Maybe with the exception of Ethan Nation, who left the team, who was who was a special teams guy last year and could have factored into that corner race. Not sure about that, but like pretty quiet. And that's probably the way that Matt Rule likes it.
Yeah. And I think Nation maybe had started to slide down the depth chart a bit at corner, and that precipitated his decision to leave the program when the team came back after finals in early June. That at least seemed to be the case toward the end of the spring. So, but Sire Wright, is a piece that slides in to help fill his spot, and the spot of Bly Hill, of course. The more significant news than even some of these transactions, or most of these transactions, was what happened on April 27th in the first half of the spring game, with Bly Hill going down to injury. And we expect to see him at some point in September, but Bly Hill, the transfer from St. Francis in Pennsylvania, the FCS school, he won the job, according to coaches in the spring, as the corner opposite Tommy Hill. And now he's not going to be available for camp. So that likely sets him back a bit, even more than just missing camp. He's going to need time to get ready for the season, and that's going to unfortunately have to come during the season. So you may see him in Big Ten games, but maybe Sire Wright, who I put as the top player addition of this offseason, maybe he's locked down a starting spot. That same starting spot at corner by the time Bly Hill comes back, and then Bly Hill's like your third guy in, possibly among those corners, which is something that Nebraska needs. Yeah.
That's ideally the situation with them. It's probably not talked about enough. I don't know. You spent some time on it this summer, just that defensive back room and that corner room specifically. Actually, the safeties are fine, but the corners, and the loss of Bly Hill there, that's the hardest time to miss too, right? I mean, in the summer and in the beginning of camp, and then the first couple of weeks of the season, like that's just not the time that you want to miss in order to establish yourself. So it'll be like there is a level of urgency, I think, there with Wright. So I think he's appropriately rated on this list. That the other guy that we haven't talked about that you did list was the addition, and he was right after Wright at number 4 here. The addition of Jalen Gramstad, who we talked about a few times in this podcast, the NAIA Player of the Year last year at Northwestern College in Iowa. He comes to Nebraska's quarterback room off of a post-grad camp in kind of a wing and a prayer, and he's here and he provides a lot of he provides what he provides as far as his quarterback play, but also he provides a nice little safety net for the people around him in the room, as we've talked about. And I don't think that's a small deal, because if it changes the role of the aforementioned Heinrich Harburg even a little bit, I mean, that's a pretty significant addition to Nebraska's like picture on offense.
Right. And that was like a flash in the pan for a week in June. We couldn't stop talking about Jalen Gramstad, and then that's kind of gone to the back burner as we've gotten closer to the season here in late June and July. But yeah, let's not forget the significance that he could have this year in just kind of stabilizing matters in that quarterback room, helping Dylan Raiola. I think if Nebraska wants to take that route to put Gramstad in a spot where he can kind of look over Dylan's shoulder when they're watching film or in meetings, and I get that the NAIA level and the film that he would have watched is going to be a lot different than what Raiola's watching during Ohio State week or USC week. But I think experience is experience, and he's a poised guy whose value could be important in the QB room. And then Mekhi Nelson as a running back, a late add in this recruiting class, someone who's joining the program immediately. I put him behind Granstad. We talked about Ethan Nation. The rest of this stuff, David Hofkin, the German offensive lineman, great story, but he's going to come in and be a developmental guy. Ruquan Buckley, developmental guy on the offensive line, departed to go to Michigan State. And then you've got John Hole, the kicker out of Lincoln Southwest, who is going to get the chance to compete. So maybe that one will go to the top of the list by the end of the season. But right now, I think that job still belongs to Tristan Albano.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. Okay, that'll wrap us up for today. We'll be back on Friday with another,
or Thursday maybe,
or Thursday. Who knows? But we got 3 podcasts. We'll certainly give you that this week here on the Locked On Nebraska podcast, and we'll talk to you then. But first, a quick reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. It's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app.